Next tip that I gathered was a little bit counterintuitive, but it's to avoid why questions. Now, this I found fascinating because when growing up, when I used to think about what are some good questions to ask people I speak to, why is one of the best ones because it is a more open ended question and it invites deeper responses and motivations so that you can build a connection with the other person. However, what Alan points out is that in some situations, the why questions can be laced with judgment. Take a listen to what he has to say.
An example of an open-ended question sometimes that falls flat is the why question.
Why questions are loaded with judgment quite often. Not always, but 90% of the time. Why do you do that? Why are you asking me in that tone of voice? Why did you decide to stay with your abusive wife or husband? Why didn't you do this? As you can see in all of those questions, there's an implied judgment, an implied negativity. It's not a positive, non-judgmental approach. It's an approach that somehow comes with baggage.
So, according to Alan Stokes, the why question is often laced with judgment. It demands a kind of defense from the person that you're speaking to. And it's very personal. It can come across as a personal attack if you're not careful the way that you're speaking. Now, in some situations, whether that is a debate or a discussion aimed at reaching a particular solution or agreement, inquiring into the other person's reasoning or motivations is necessary. But in more emotionally delicate situations, why questions can come across as very aggressive. And there are many other ways you can substitute to avoid the judgment laced why questions. Here is one example from Nadeau.
So we can come back and think about some of those phrases that Paul used. My favourite one, it's so short, it's so simple, it's so neutral. He simply asks, what happened? When journalists research a story, what happened is the question they use to collect different perspectives and notice how to listen both for similarities and differences in the same story by asking the same question. What happened? That might be a great question for you to practice when you're talking to somebody who has to deal with a lot of complex and complicated information.
So as you can see, it can benefit to ask more neutral what or how questions. So instead of saying something like, why were you late? It could sound a lot more neutral and more inviting to say, I noticed that you were late today. What happened? Another one we just discussed was what's going on? You know, I noticed that you've been a little bit more talkative and a little bit less respectful in class today. What's going on? These more neutral what or how questions don't imply judgment or blame. They merely ask the other person to share their side of the story, and it invites more rapport and more of a deeper listening experience. If you have an interpersonal conflict, whether that's with your students or your coworkers, these kinds of neutral what or how questions can be a lot more productive than the more defensive why questions. All right, thank you so much for listening today. I think that these crisis workers have a lot of valuable advice with the difficult work that they do that can help us as teachers in our offices and in our classroom. So I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next class. Until then, cheers!